In the late spring of 1893, an unprecedented and devastating deep freeze swept across North America and Europe. This wasn't just a cold snap. It was a climatic shockwave, a sudden plunge in temperatures following an unseasonably warm spell. Farmers, lulled by false hope, watched in horror as their burgeoning crops, their life's work and their families' futures, succumbed to a brutal, untimely winter. The stage was set for an agricultural apocalypse. April and May of that year delivered an Arctic assault to the American Midwest, Great Plains, and Western Europe. Temperatures plummeted far below freezing, turning vibrant green shoots into brittle, dark husks. Imagine prosperous fruit orchards, promising winter wheat fields, and newly emerging crops, all flourishing just days before, now utterly annihilated. The sheer speed of the destruction left little room for salvage or hope. But this wasn't just about crop loss. It was a genetic massacre. Local agricultural bulletins across the continent documented the demise of multi-generational heirloom seed varieties. These were not mere commodities. They were living legacies, cultivated for centuries by European settlers and indigenous communities. Passed down through families, resilient and adapted, these seeds held the genetic memory of generations of farmers' efforts. The loss wasn't just a bad harvest. It was the obliteration of localized seed banks. Small farming communities, once self-sufficient and independent, found themselves stripped bare, without seed stock for the next planting season. This wasn't merely an economic blow. It was an existential threat, severing the vital, unbroken chain of agricultural knowledge and self-reliance passed down for hundreds, if not thousands, of years. Historical weather records from the U.S. Weather Bureau paint a stark picture, record-breaking temperature swings that devastated regional food supplies. One day, a balmy spring; the next, a deep freeze. This volatility, extreme even for an era before climate change discourse, spoke to an almost unnatural event. From the grain belts of Kansas and Nebraska to the orchards of the Ohio Valley, no agricultural heartland was spared. Imagine the despair. A farmer wakes to discover an entire season's work, months of toil and hope, wiped out in a single cruel night. These were not just crops, they were a farmer's life savings, their children's food, their community's sustenance. This visceral shock, the sudden, overwhelming destruction, forced families to confront an unthinkable reality. Their agricultural traditions and their very way of life were under siege. This catastrophe struck at the heart of generations of agricultural wisdom. Farmers had carefully selected and adapted these heirloom varieties to their specific microclimates, ensuring resilience and flavor. The freeze didn't just kill plants, it eradicated centuries of embodied knowledge, passed verbally and through practice from parent to child. It was a cultural and biological theft, leaving an irreplaceable void. While individual stories of hardship are poignant, the cumulative effect was staggering. Entire regions, once vibrant with agricultural activity, fell silent. The economic output vanished. The food supply dwindled. This was more than a series of isolated tragedies. It was a systemic shock to the very foundation of societal sustenance. The consequences, as we shall see, would ripple far beyond the fields. The timing of this freeze is crucial. It followed an unseasonably warm period, perhaps lulling the plants into a premature emergence, making them exceptionally vulnerable. This ecological trap accentuated the disaster, as the early bloomers, often the most venerable heirloom varieties, were the first to perish. It was a cruel deception by nature, setting up a perfect storm of agricultural destruction. Footage from the era, even in its limited forms, hints at the profound human struggle. Accounts describe desperate families attempting to protect their last remaining seeds, or salvaging what little they could from frozen fields. This wasn't merely a business setback. It was a fight for survival, a forced reckoning with the fragility of life when dependent on the unpredictable hand of nature and the bounty of the earth. The narrative of 1893 often focuses on the financial panic, but the agricultural root cause is critical. The economic collapse did not happen in a vacuum, but sprung directly from these blighted fields. The connection between the land and the nation's solvency was never more starkly illustrated. It was a cascading failure, where the natural world's capriciousness directly undermined human financial constructs. What makes this event so profoundly impactful is not just the scale of destruction, but what was lost forever. These were often varieties resistant to local pests, adapted to specific soils, carrying unique flavors and nutritional profiles. Their demise was an irreversible genetic bottleneck, a catastrophic loss to biodiversity that would have untold consequences for future food security and agricultural resilience. The 1893 Great Frost, therefore, was not merely a natural disaster. It was a pivotal moment, an accelerator for profound societal change. It cleared the ground, quite literally, for a new agricultural order, an order that would replace localized self-sufficiency with centralized control and ancient wisdom with industrial efficiency. The question is, was this merely an unfortunate consequence or something far more deliberate? Freezing, catching fruit orchards, winter wheat fields, and emerging crops completely unprepared. These plants, coaxed into early growth by preceding warmth, stood no chance against the sudden icy grip. From the fertile Ohio Valley to the vast grain belts of Kansas and Nebraska, the destruction was swift and absolute. This wasn't merely a bad season. It was the beginning of an agricultural reset, an event that would forever alter the landscape of farming. What made this freeze particularly devastating was its timing and target. The official U.S. Weather Bureau records from that fateful year confirm unprecedented temperature swings. While nature often delivers challenges, the specific confluence of an early spring followed by such intense, prolonged cold amplified the catastrophe. This wasn't just a localized phenomenon. Historical weather maps show a vast geographic impact, hinting at a systemic vulnerability in the agricultural practices of the time. Local agricultural bulletins of the era paint a grim picture. They meticulously documented the demise of multi-generational heirloom seed varieties. These weren't just any seeds. They were the genetic legacy of centuries, carefully nurtured and adapted by both European settlers and indigenous farmers. Each seed represented a unique lineage, perfectly suited to local microclimates and traditional cultivation methods. Their loss in such a short span was an irreversible obliteration of agricultural heritage. Imagine the panic. Small farming communities for generations had relied on saving their own seeds, a cornerstone of their self-sufficiency. The freeze didn't just destroy the season's yield, it decimated their crucial seed banks. Without these localized reserves, passed down from one planting season to the next, farmers faced an existential crisis. The very foundation of their future harvests was wiped clean, leaving them without the means to replant, trapped in a void of uncertainty. Before 1893, the world's agriculture was a tapestry of genetic diversity. Thousands of open-pollinated, regionally adapted heirloom varieties constituted the global food supply. European settlers had brought with them robust old-world grains and fruit cultivars, thriving for centuries without the need for commercial fertilizers or complex intellectual property. These crops were the embodiment of agricultural independence, a testament to generations of careful selection and local knowledge. The sudden, artificial seed famine created by the freeze left farmers with an impossible choice. With their own generational seeds gone, they were forced to seek alternatives. Into this void stepped nascent commercial seed monopolies, offering standardized, often hybrid varieties. These new seeds were marketed as a solution, but their adoption marked a profound shift away from self-reliance towards external dependence, fundamentally altering the relationship between seed and grower. What followed was an unforeseen extinction event. Historic varieties of perennial grains and cold-resistant fruits, once staples of regional diets, simply vanished from existence. They disappeared from official agricultural catalogs, from farm fields, and from collective memory. This catastrophic loss of genetic diversity wasn't just an agricultural setback. It represented the end of decentralized, sovereign agriculture in North America, a profound and irreversible change to the continent's food heritage. The ripple effect extended beyond the fields, directly triggering the Panic of 1893. This wasn't merely a financial blip. It was one of the most severe economic depressions in United States history. As agricultural output plummeted, the interconnected web of commerce began to fray. The systemic failure initiated by the freeze exposed deep vulnerabilities in the nation's financial architecture, demonstrating how deeply intertwined agriculture was with the broader economy. The immediate aftermath saw an astonishing number of bankruptcies. Over 500 banks failed, suffocated by unpaid agricultural loans and a panicked populace. Dozens of railroad companies, whose fortunes were tied to agricultural freight volumes, declared insolvency as their lifeblood dried up overnight. The collapse wasn't confined to farming. It spread like wildfire through every sector dependent on the prosperity and movement of agricultural goods, exposing a brittle economic reliance. The USDA's annual reports from 1893 became a grim testament to the scale of the disaster. They meticulously documented a historic decline in national wheat, corn, and fruit production. Farmers, already burdened by debt, faced impossible choices. Their families' livelihoods destroyed, and without new seeds or any prospect of recovery, many saw their land foreclosed, sold off to a new breed of owners, corporate land trusts and banking syndicates, forever altering the ownership of agricultural land. Amidst the widespread hardship, a different kind of growth occurred in the hands of speculators. On the Chicago Board of Trade, grain prices soared during the shortage, providing immense profits for those who could manipulate the scarcity. This rapid consolidation of control over national grain reserves marked a profound shift. Centralized grain elevators began to replace regional farm storage, fundamentally changing how agricultural commodities were stored, distributed, and ultimately priced. The post-1893 landscape saw the rise of corporate agricultural cartels. They established patented seed systems, intertwining their fortunes with a growing dependency on chemical fertilizers. Legislation, enacted in the late 1890s, further cemented this control by penalizing uncertified seed trading. This effectively restricted farmers' age-old practice of saving seeds across harvests, forcing them into a transactional, commercial relationship annually, eroding their independence and increasing their reliance on external providers. Federal agricultural policies began a dramatic pivot, no longer solely focused on protecting independent family farms. The emphasis shifted towards supporting large-scale industrial agribusiness. The traditional self-sufficient farm model, once the backbone of the nation, was systematically replaced. It became subsumed by a debt-based commercial farming system, inextricably linked to and dictated by volatile central market prices, completing the cycle of dependency that the original seed famine had initiated. The human cost of this agricultural revolution was immense. Historical records reveal a mass migration of displaced farmers, their rural livelihoods shattered, into burgeoning industrial city factories. The loss of rural food independence had a profound and lasting impact, reshaping urban labor dynamics and forever altering food distribution systems throughout the entire 20th century. The fields emptied, the cities swelled, and the very fabric of American society was irrevocably changed, revealing the 1893 freeze as a catastrophic catalyst. Temperatures far below freezing, wiping out entire fruit orchards, vast winter wheat fields, and all the early emerging crops. This wasn't merely a bad season, it was an agricultural massacre. The widespread destruction immediately sparked alarm, but few understood the true long-term implications for the very fabric of global food systems. The chill winds carried more than just ice. They heralded the end of an era. The stage was set for a dramatic, irreversible transformation. Local agricultural bulletins, crucial sources of information for isolated farming communities, recorded the devastating truth. Multi-generational heirloom seed varieties, meticulously cultivated over centuries by both European settlers and indigenous farmers, perished in the unprecedented frost. This was more than just a crop loss. It was the obliteration of localized seed banks, stripping small communities of their self-sufficient seed stocks for the next planting season, forcing them into an impossible dependency. And the official records confirmed the catastrophe. Historical weather data from the U.S. Weather Bureau meticulously documented record-breaking temperature swings, verifying the scale of regional food supply devastation. From the expansive grain belts of Kansas and Nebraska to the verdant orchards of the Ohio Valley, no agricultural region was spared. This wasn't a localized incident. It was a continental calamity, a climate event unlike any before, fundamentally altering agricultural geography. The immediate consequence of the unfathomable crop failures was the direct trigger for the Panic of 1893. This financial maelstrom would become one of the most severe depressions in United States history. In a brutal cascade, over 500 banks failed, their reserves depleted by loans tied to crop futures, while dozens of railroad companies declared bankruptcy as agricultural freight volumes collapsed overnight. The economic earthquake reverberated far beyond the fields. The United States Department of Agriculture's annual reports from 1893 painted a stark picture, documenting a historic, unprecedented decline in national wheat, corn, and fruit production. This agricultural collapse directly fueled a wave of farm foreclosures. Small family farms, many unable to recover from the loss of their irreplaceable heirloom seed stock, were forced to sell off generations of land to corporate land trusts and banking syndicates, forever altering land ownership. Amidst the unfolding crisis, a more insidious shift was occurring. Speculators on the Chicago Board of Trade, recognizing the acute shortage, expertly manipulated grain prices, consolidating control over national grain reserves. Centralized grain elevators began to replace traditional regional farm storage facilities, fundamentally altering how agricultural commodities were stored, distributed, and priced. This was a strategic move, creating bottlenecks where none existed before. Prior to 1893, global agriculture was a diverse tapestry, relying on thousands of open-pollinated, regionally adapted heirloom crop varieties. European settlers, for centuries, had brought with them resilient old-world grains and fruit cultivars, varieties that remarkably required no commercial fertilizers or patent protection. They were self-sustaining, a testament to generations of agricultural wisdom, representing true food sovereignty and independence for farmers worldwide. The widespread agricultural disaster of 1893 didn't just cause a famine, it created a devastating, artificial seed famine. Surviving farmers, desperate for replanting material, were left with no choice but to purchase standardized commercial seeds from nascent agricultural monopolies. New agricultural supply companies swiftly introduced hybrid and standardized seed varieties, specifically designed to replace the now extinct native and heirloom strains, seizing control of the essential first step in farming. This systemic loss of genetic diversity in food crops marked an irreversible turning point, the end of decentralized, sovereign agriculture in North America. Generations of agricultural knowledge, embedded in these historic, robust varieties of perennial grains and cold-resistant fruits, simply vanished, disappearing permanently from official agricultural catalogs. A rich legacy, built on adaptation and independence, was erased, replaced by a centralized, uniform system, vulnerable to single points of failure. In the aftermath of 1893, the new agricultural order quickly solidified. Corporate agricultural cartels methodically established patented seed systems and fostered a growing dependency on chemical fertilizers. Legislation passed in the late 1890s further cemented this control, penalizing farmers who engaged in uncertified seed trading, effectively restricting their ancient right to save seeds across harvests. The very essence of farming, its autonomy, was systematically criminalized by design. Federal agricultural policies underwent a profound transformation. Their focus subtly yet decisively shifted from protecting independent family farms to actively supporting large-scale industrial agribusiness. The traditional, self-sufficient farm model, a cornerstone of American identity for centuries, was systematically dismantled and replaced by debt-based commercial farming, entirely dependent on central market prices and external inputs, eroding farmer stability and independence. The historical records reveal another stark consequence. The 1893 agricultural collapse dramatically accelerated the migration of displaced farmers and their families into burgeoning industrial city factories. Stripped of their land and their livelihood, rural populations flocked to urban centers, seeking any means of survival. This loss of rural food independence didn't just reshape agricultural practices. It fundamentally altered urban labor dynamics and food distribution systems across the entire 20th century. The question, then, is no longer whether a deep frost devastated the crops of 1893. The records are undeniably clear. The real inquiry, the one that resonates through history, is how this calamitous natural disaster was so effectively leveraged. How the profound crisis became the perfect opportunity to fundamentally remake global food control, transitioning from a decentralized, resilient system to one dominated by central power, seed monopolies, and corporate interests. The echoes of 1893 still shape our plates today. What if the echoes of that single devastating spring still resonate in our modern food system? The genetic homogeneity we now observe across vast agricultural landscapes, the reliance on a handful of commercial varieties, can be traced directly back to that chilling year. The diversified tapestry of heirloom crops, once a safeguard against disease and climate fluctuations, was unraveled. We are left with a vulnerability, a fragility that only grew stronger after 1893. Ethnobotanists and passionate seed archivists today dedicate their lives to recovering what was lost. They painstakingly search through forgotten family histories, dusty attics, and remote homesteads, hoping to find a single surviving seed of a pre-1893 heirloom varietal. Their incredible work underscores the profound and irreparable loss of agricultural heritage that occurred over a century ago, a testament to what we unknowingly discarded. The contrast is stark. The vibrant diversity of decentralized, sovereign agriculture before 1893 versus the streamlined, often precarious industrial model we inhabit now. Our dependence on global supply chains and a limited gene pool for staple crops highlights the true cost of that centralization. What was once local, resilient, and self-sufficient became globally interconnected and inherently more fragile in the face of disruption. The archival records from the United States Department of Agriculture, gathering dust in collections, tell a silent but powerful story. These are not merely statistics. They are the physical paper trail documenting the systematic dismantling of old-world agriculture. They show how, amidst the crisis, decisions were made that steered the course of our food systems for generations, largely unexamined until now, revealing deeper intentions. The Panic of 1893, remembered primarily as a financial crisis, was fundamentally rooted in agricultural collapse. Its origins in the frozen fields of spring transformed financial markets, forcing the closure of banks and railroads. This interdependence reveals how profoundly intertwined nature, economy, and human systems truly are. A delicate balance that, once broken, cascades through every facet of society, with enduring consequences. Crucially, the question before us is not whether a deep frost devastated the crops of 1893. That much is undisputed. The real inquiry, the historical mystery we unravel, is how this natural disaster was leveraged. How did a climatic event become the catalyst for a deliberate, structural shift in global food control? How was crisis exploited to establish a new agricultural order, remaking our world fundamentally? The shift from open-pollinated, regionally adapted heirloom varieties to patented, standardized commercial seeds was a seismic one. Farmers lost not only their immediate harvest, but also their future independence. They became consumers of seeds, locked into a cycle of annual purchases, forever changing the relationship between the farmer and their crop, a dependency engineered out of a crisis. This loss of seed-saving autonomy directly impacted food sovereignty for generations. The ability to save, adapt, and replant one's own seeds is the cornerstone of food independence. When that cornerstone crumbles, so too does the community's ability to feed itself without external intervention. The 1893 freeze accelerated this erosion of self-sufficiency, leaving communities vulnerable to market forces. The post-1893 era saw the rise of corporate agricultural cartels and their increasingly powerful control over seed production and distribution. This wasn't just about efficiency, it was about consolidation of power. The legislative frameworks that followed further entrenched this control, penalizing farmers who dared to maintain their ancestral practices of seed exchange and local adaptation, making independent farming illicit. This restructuring wasn't a benevolent evolution. It was a deliberate systemic change. Federal agricultural policies pivoted from safeguarding the small, independent family farm to actively fostering large-scale industrial agribusiness. The traditional model, based on resilience and independence, was systematically replaced by a debt-laden commercial system, slaves to market prices and corporate directives, a new paradigm enforced methodically. The displacement from the land, born from foreclosures and the inability to replant, fueled a mass migration to nascent industrial cities. The faces seen working in bustling factories of the early 20th century often belonged to farmers and their families, forced from their ancestral lands. This dramatically reshaped urban labor dynamics and the entire food distribution system, further severing communities from their food sources. The legacy of 1893 is not confined to history books. It's visible in the genetic vulnerability of our current food chain, the diminished biodiversity on our plates, and the corporate dominance within agriculture. Our modern industrial food system, while providing abundance, also carries the inherent risks of monoculture and reliance on a few powerful players, consequences that stem directly from the choices made then. The true lesson of the Great Frost of 1893 lies in recognizing how a moment of crisis can be profoundly exploited to reshape fundamental structures. It compels us to ask difficult questions about control, resilience, and the true cost of convenience in our food. The historical records provide not just a testament to a crisis, but a stark warning for the future, if we choose to listen. The pursuit of agricultural autonomy, the fight for diverse seed stock, and the re-establishment of local food systems are, in essence, an ongoing effort to reverse the centralization initiated over a century ago. The ghosts of those perished heirloom crops call to us, urging us to reconsider the path chosen in 1893 and to build a truly resilient and equitable food future, echoing lessons from the past.